me and Miss Janelle were talking there, and I said, no matter how old your kids get, they're always your babies. And I told her a story of one of my brothers when he was about 40. He got the flu really bad, and my sister-in-law said she just couldn't stand him. He was a terrible patient. And she said, well, what do you want? He said, I want my mommy. So she called my mom, and my mom drove 2.5 hours to his house and took care of him. I think so. My sister-in-law would not kill him in his sleep, but it's always you always need your mother. That's for sure. Any other prayer requests?
Do you remember Sid Jabot and Bobby and Michelle Douglas?
What was the last name? I'm sorry.
Dollin.
Okay.
Bobby's had, Michelle's already had a colonoscopy, another one. His cancer has returned, and talking to Michelle, and talking to her, it sounds like this is going to be a reoccurring thing right here. So, and they both need salvation.
Now, is Bobby at home, brother?
Yes.
Okay. Any others this evening?
My sister-in-law had some tests done, results were all so good, so just remember her.
Also,
Yes, ma'am.
remember our newest member, Monica,
Mm-hmm.
her grandfather, his name is Bob, Ayo, Io, she pronounced it. He had lung cancer and they got him free of it, but now it has come back again.
Okay.
She asked that we pray for him.
Miss Monica, for those of you that don't, most of you probably know she works at the gas station up here, and whenever she's talking to me about baptism and stuff, and I said, no, after you're baptized, if you would want to be a member of the church, and she got big tears in her eyes, and she said, oh my, yes, and she was so thankful for the love she's felt here in just a short time. So. But that's a good testimony to have that some people want to be a part of us quickly. That she said yes. She said if she said you can do that, and I said well the church can vote as soon as you're baptized, and she's just such a sweet person. So pray for that. Any others?
Pastor, we need to continue to pray for Bubby and Norma Jean as they're in Florida and they're searching for a church. They didn't get to go this Sunday, but they have two churches that they're looking for. And she said, Bubby said, definitely has to be a Baptist church. They're off to a good start. So
What's the name of the town where they are? Huh?
Titusville.
Titusville. Okay. Well, they're in luck. I may know a good church right in that area. And I was going to call them today, but I wanted to double check with my contacts, aka Old Man Grigsby, about as he has a good friend that has pastored down there. So we'll make sure pray they get a good church. That's a sign of true conversion to want to be fed and fed well. Any others this evening?
Brother David, I got a praise report. Jim Powell, a man I've worked with and asked prayer for many times, he spent the last several weeks out there with LSU for treatment for his cancer. He was able to, with his therapy, was able to progress enough. They didn't think he was going to be able to come home until early next year. He was able to progress enough that he was able to come home today. So,
Amen. Amen. It's always nice whenever you get to come home earlier than expected, too. Any others? Any other praise or prayer?
We've been praying for a little boy named Wall. He's 5 years old. He started having seizures, and they did the MRI and stuff, and they think it's just an old injury, thank God, and it will resolve itself. So, praise the Lord for that.
We'll pray for that. Continue to pray that he'll heal quickly. 5 years old, that's scary. Anyone else? All right. Well, Steve Bateman, do you care to lead us to prayer this evening?
Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight, Lord, just thank you for this opportunity to be in your house. Lord, we just thank you for this day that you've blessed us with, and for health and strength, Lord, will give us. And Lord, we just come to you now, Lord, with all these prayer requests. And Lord, we know that pray that you'll be with Sid, Bobby Dolan, or Jim Powell. We pray that you'll be with the needs that she has. And Lord, we pray that you'll be with Robbie, Lord. We just pray that you'll wrap your loving arms around him. And Lord, we just ask that you'll be with the doctors and just show them what the need is and how to take care of it. And Lord, we just ask them for your healing hand upon him. Lord, we come to you also praying that you'll be with Ricky's little great-granddaughter, Lord. We pray that you'll be with the need that she has. And for this little boy that's suffering these seizures, Lord, we pray that you'll take care of him. Lord, many, many prayer requests, Lord, tonight. Many on our prayer list, many needs. And Lord, we bring them to you, but Lord, we know you already know all about them. You know that you know how that we're praying for them, and you know what they need to have to get well. And Lord, these ones with this cancer, Lord, we don't always understand, Lord, how they can be well and then turn around and have it again. But Lord, we know that you're in control of everything, and we just ask that your will be done. Lord, we thank you for our pastor and pray that you'll just be with him and bless him, because he was just a message that has to hear tonight. We thank you for Bubby, Lord. We pray that you'll be with him and Norma Jean. Pray, Lord, that you'll just give him the church that you have him to be in right away. And Lord, for the many, many round about us who are unsaved, Lord, we pray that they'll see their need of salvation. They'll see their need to get things right with you. And Lord, let's not forget, we pray that you'll be at this country, Lord, the needs that this country has. We pray, Lord, that we'll be a Christian nation again. And our leaders will look to you for guidance and direction in every decision that they make. And as Christians, Lord, I pray that we'll stand tall and do the right things and uplift you in everything that's said and done. Lord, please be with us and take care of us throughout this evening. Give us a safe trip home tonight. Lord, we pray that everything's done through the holidays will bring honor and glory to you. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Pastor, I
Yeah.
noticed that Arlene left right after the announcement about Titus, so I'm not sure that she knew, so we need to really remember her in prayer.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I spoke, I thought she had said Miss Arlene knew, but maybe she didn't.
It seemed like she knew, so
Okay.
maybe she did, but she seemed a little upset.
Oh, well, I should. Well, she slipped in there right before, so I didn't have a chance to ask. But maybe when we were talking, she didn't say she knew, but I thought she had said she did. But maybe they were waiting for the test results, so we'll need to pray for Miss Arlene, definitely. And hard situation, so pray for that. You know, it's almost Christmas time. I don't know if you noticed or not. I mean, we got all these poinsettias, we got Christmas trees, we got Christmas carols, we've got Christmas plays. I was joking, Brother Bobby, I was making a joke at your expense. You weren't here, so I figured I'd pick on you when you weren't here. You know, you had the grandbaby, and you weren't here, and then somebody said, I think Brother Eddie told me, he said, well, Brother Bobby's got to go to the kids' Christmas play. I said, he acts like grandkids are important or something. What's the matter with this guy? But I love this time of year. And I started, I fully intended, I've got my notes sitting right over there. We could still go on with facts from the book of Acts this evening and move right into the next chapter and look at the man laying at the gate beautiful outside the temple. But when we came in and Brother Bobby started singing, I decided not to do that. Brother Bobby was singing, and I think he was kind of laughing. I was looking for a songbook, and here's the thing about Christmas carols. Everybody knows the first verse. But there are more than one verse to the Christmas carols. And so I was looking frantically because I knew once we got out of that first verse, I was lost. And so I just kind of mumble through, and get to a part that I know. But is that all? That's all of us. We used to go Christmas caroling. I grew up in a church, Salem Baptist Church outside of Grayson, Kentucky, on Big Lost Creek, Kentucky. My father pastored there for many years. And we would always go and Christmas carol as a church. And we'd always make fruit baskets up and go to the shut-ins, and they'd get a fruit basket, and we'd carol to them. And then we'd always go to the nursing homes and Christmas carol. And there was one nursing home in particular. It's called Riverview Nursing Home outside of Russell, Kentucky. And it was kind of a poor nursing home, so we would always take them gifts too. And me and my friend Adam Prince, who is a deacon's kid, and that's why preachers' kids are bad. It's because deacons' kids, they hang out with deacons' kids. That's why preachers' kids are the worst. They learn all that from deacons' kids. That's what it's. But we'd always go down. We'd always called it the dungeon because you went downstairs, and we were always scared. And me and Adam would go down there and sing and hand out gifts. And then he would always tell me ghost stories of ghosts that wandered the hall of the dungeon. And so I'd be scared to death. But a lot of memories this time of year. A lot of things that we think of, and a lot of good memories. And they all revolve around family, most of them, and friends, and sometimes people that have gone on. But in our house, we have a tradition every year. And I've done this since the kids were just wee little. And they're not out here, and so they won't have to endure this twice. So this evening, I thought since we're all family, that I would let you peek in as to what happens in the Grigsby household on Christmas Eve. And this is the same thing we do every year. Traditions change as the kids get older. We used to go out and throw reindeer food in the front yard. And yes, I'm sorry, we used to talk about Santa at my house. If that bothers you, I'm sorry. I don't really care. But I'll apologize if it offends anybody. And our elf was always about, checking on the kids. But traditions change when kids get older. Now we do a bake-off every year on Christmas Eve. And I don't like to brag, but I've not won ever. And last year we added a new category of best presentation. That's what it was. I think they did that just so I could win something, which was kind of sweet. So we have a bake-off, and we, do some things. We go see the Christmas lights. But then, right before we go to bed, we all sat down on the couch, all the kids, and Candace, they sat on the couch, and I tell them a story every year. Same story every year. And it's just a tradition at our house. And it's a true story. Actually, it's a true story. I went to school at Rose Hill Christian School in Ashland, Kentucky. And while I was in attendance there was a wonderful man of God named Gary Southard. And Gary Southard had been a teacher there. He had been one of the founding people involved in that church. He'd been an assistant pastor at Rose Hill Baptist Church for years. He had been the song leader. He's a jack of all trades. And he'd been the administrator of the school, the principal of the school. And by the time I came there, Brother Gary was older, and he wasn't in great health, but he was still there. We knew he was there. And every year at Christmas time, the chapel service we had right before Christmas, he told us a story. Same story every year. And so I tell this story to my kids every year. It made a huge impression on me. And as a young man, and I cry every year. Miss Vanessa was talking about the little rendition she did there. And she said, I always cry. Well, I always cry when I tell this story too, so you just have to bear with me. But Gary would always tell this story, and went a little something like this. He was growing up in a town there in Ohio. And it was an industrial town, They built stuff there back when America still built things, and America was still burning coal at an alarming rate. And that's where Gary grew up, a little industrial town there in southern Ohio. And it was coming up Christmas time. And Gary was just a young boy, just second grade. And they drew names. You know how we used to do that. They drew names to pick the kids, that they wanted to give a Christmas gift to. So Gary drew his best buddy, Tommy. And he was excited because Gary knew exactly what he wanted to get Tommy. In fact, at the little nickel and dime store there in town, there was this little red fire engine. And this fire engine was made out of American steel. And it had a little ladder that went up and down, up and down. It had a little bell in the back that went dingy, 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 dingy. It even had a fireman in the front that sat like this and a little Dalmatian beside of him. And Gary knew as soon as he got Tommy's name that he wanted to get that for Tommy because, in fact, he wanted that himself for Christmas. And he thought if he raised a big enough fuss and his mom and dad saw how much he loved the fire engine and how much he wanted Tommy to have the fire engine, then maybe they would get him the fire engine too. So he ran home and immediately he began to tell his mother, Mom, we have to get Tommy the fire engine. I know it's above the limit. I know it's above the price, but Tommy's my best friend in the whole world. He deserves the best toy ever. So he politicked and begged his mother for a couple weeks until finally she broke down and Mrs. Southard said, okay, we'll go buy this fire engine. So they went to the 5 and dime store, and they bought the little fire engine made out of American steel, and it had a ladder that went up and down, a little bell that went dingy, 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 dingy. Had a fireman in the front and the Dalmatian beside of him. Gary was excited. And he knew that his mom saw how excited he was, and maybe he would get the same gift for Christmas. So he took it home, and his mom helped him. They got the most beautiful wrapping paper they could find, and they wrapped it up really beautifully, and they put a big bow on top, and Gary made with his own little hands. Gary was kind of a chubby kid, his own little chubby second grader hands. He made a little name tag and put Tommy on the top. Took it to school. On the back of the classroom, there was a Christmas tree, much like this Christmas tree, I'm sure. And what would happen, the kids, the weeks and days leading up to the Christmas party, the last day of school, they would come and they would slide their gifts under the tree. And Gary took his gift and he slid it under the tree to Tom, and he looked around, and there were only 2 or 3 gifts there at this point, and there was no gift with Gary's name on it, and he was fine with that. Well, then the days, proceeded, and, one day led to the next. And Gary would come in. He walked to school every morning. He would walk in. He'd take off his little rubber galoshes that he wore and his overcoat. And his mom probably dressed him like that kid from the Christmas story. She bundled him up. He took all those clothes off. And he'd go to the Christmas tree and look. And every day that passed, there would be more presents, but never a present with his name on it. And Gary was okay with that. And then it came the day right before Christmas break. The day that would define Christmas break for a young boy of second grade age. And he went into school, and he took off his coat, and he took off his gloves, and he took off his little red galoshes, and he went over to the tree, and there was still no present with his name. Well, he went and he sat at his desk a little disappointed. He thought, well, maybe nobody got my name in the Secret Santa drawing. And then he saw her, Susie. Now, there's no nice way to say it. Susie was the smelly kid in class. She always wore clothes that were either way too big or way too small. They always had holes and patches. Nothing she had was nice. Her hair was all natty and tatty and went in all different directions. She always disshuffled. She just didn't look like she had a whole lot. And Gary watched in horror as Susie walked through the door and came over and took a package and placed it under the tree. Gary's heart sank because he knew it had to be his. So Gary got up, and he nonchalantly, as a chubby second grade boy can do, nonchalantly walked over to the tree again and looked, and sure enough, there was a box, and it was wrapped in old newspaper. And there was no bow, and there was no pretty ribbon, and on the top, there wasn't even a pretty little name tag like he had made his friend Tommy. Just in pencil was scrawled the name Gary. Oh, the devastation that set in. Because Gary knew that present was his, and it came from Susie, and oh my, what did she give him? So Gary went and he sat, and instead of anticipating the party and anticipating the fun and anticipating the gift, he sat and dread the entire day. And of course, back in those days, we can all remember, because back in my day too, we would do it. They actually had parties at school for Christmas, and they actually had cakes and candies and stuff that was bad for you, and nobody had a peanut allergy somehow. And they would bring you punch and pop. And so Gary went and he sat at his desk, and his teacher, Mrs. Smith, who was one of those great teachers. Those teachers that are ageless. She's probably 150 years old in your mind. She's always taught second grade at the same school. Big, loving, granny type lady. Mrs. Smith went around and she handed all the cakes and cookies and all the punch, and they played Christmas music on the record player that they had. And then finally the day was almost done, and Mrs. Smith said, okay, everyone, I'm going to call your name one at a time to go get your present from under the tree. And Gary, so one by one she called the names. And one by one they went over and got their present. And one by one they brought it back to their desk. And one by one they opened the present. And Gary sat, Southard was pretty close to the end. And so by the time he was to go and get his present, there were only 1 or 2 left. And he went over and he got the present. He brought it over, set it on his desk. And just as he sat down, he heard, woo! It was Tommy. He had just opened the little red fire engine. And all the boys left their presents and gathered up. And they looked at the little red fire truck, and the ladder went up and down, and the bell went dingy, 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 dingy. And it had the little fireman. and had the Dalmatian, and all the boys admired it. And he ran it on the desk, and made the fire engine sound. And Gary was disgusted and was not even happy that Tommy was happy, because he had this box in front of him. After he got it to his desk and he could examine it in the broad light of day, it looked even worse. The newspaper looked like it had been crumpled up and thrown away and then gotten out of the garbage and unfolded and then wrapped around the box. But Gary braced himself and he thought, well, maybe it's not as bad as I think. So he ripped the paper off, and it wasn't very hard. It almost fell apart because it was such cheap newspaper. And much to his surprise, under the ugly wrapping paper was a box that looked even worse. It was an old shoe box, and it looked like it had been shoved under a bed and then in the top of a closet, and it almost looked like somebody had tried to start a fire with it at some point in time. It looked terrible. The box was in terrible disarray, and oh, what's inside? So Gary flipped the top off of the shoe box, and he looked, and there it was. It was a doll. It was an Indian girl doll. It wasn't even a new Indian girl doll. She was used, obviously. One of her braids was longer than the other. Her little Indian girl garb she was wearing was dirty and frayed and had obviously been patched. She had one moccasin that didn't match the other because it had been made out of cloth. Her fingers were a little gnarled where it looked like maybe a child had chewed on them at some point. An Indian girl doll. That's what Gary got. He was mortified. Couldn't believe it. He had gotten Tommy the best present in the whole school, and this is how he was repaid, with this doll. Oh, he began to cry. And he took the box and he shoved the lid on it, and he took the wrapping paper and he wrapped it around and he shoved it in the back of his desk. And he went over to the corner of the room and he began to kick the wall. And there he stood, kicking the wall. Little chubby second grade boy, tears running down his face all red. Mrs. Smith, the best second grade teacher that ever lived, according to Mr. Southard, came over and she knelt down beside of him. She fixed her dress and she wrapped her big arms. You know those ladies that have those big arms that are kind of fluffy. That was Mrs. Smith, and she pulled Gary close. She said, "Gary, what's wrong?" He said, "I got a stupid doll. I got Tommy the best gift. And I got a doll, an Indian girl doll, and it's not even new. It's stupid." Kick the wall. Mrs. Smith was a very loving woman. And there, as she knelt next to that little crying second grade boy, she said, "Gary, let me tell you something." She said, "Susie's dad lost his job about 2 years ago. Can't find work. Said it's hard at their house. They can't find anything to do. He's not an educated man like your dad. He does what he can, but they're poor." She said, and she has nothing in this world but that doll. It's the only toy she has. She's had it since she was just a baby. That's why there are chew marks on it, because she used to tease on its fingers. Its dress looks torn and refinished over and over because her mother lovingly has fixed it for her over the years. She gave it to you. Gary was second grade after all, so it's still stupid. Mrs. Smith just patted him on the head. She said, "You'll feel different one day." And Gary said, "I never will." So Mrs. Smith went up to the front of the class, the bell rang, and Christmas break began. And Gary went, and he put his galoshes on, and all of his overcoats, and all of his gloves, and his toboggan, and his mittens, and everything, and wrapped himself up to where he could hardly breathe. And he went and he pulled out of the desk the box as quickly as he could. He shoved it under his arm so nobody would see, and he scooted home as fast as he could. Well, Christmas morning came at the Southard house, and just like Christmas mornings before, he got everything his heart desired, even a little red fire engine from the 5 and dime store. Made of American steel, a ladder went up and down, a bell in the back went ding, 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 ding. And he admired the firefighter up front, the Dalmatian that was even more beautiful because now it was his. Oh, what a great Christmas he had. You see, when Gary got home from school, what he did, he took that box with that ugly, hideous Indian girl doll in it, and he went and he pulled a chair from the kitchen into his room, and he climbed up on top, and he shoved it in the very back of his closet as far as his little second-grade arms could reach. And there it stayed. He had a great Christmas. He went to school after the first of the year, told all of his buddies about all the great things he had. But Susie wasn't there. You see, her dad got a job in another town. That was their Christmas miracle. They moved. Gary finished school. He went through second grade and progressed right along. He went all the way through high school, graduated with honors. Turned out to be a pretty good guy. And somewhere along the way, he was saved by the grace of God. But he had forgotten all about the Indian girl doll until he was packing to go to college. You see, Gary had been called to the ministry, and he was going to Bible college, 18 years old. He was getting everything out of his closet, and he got up on a chair, and he reached up in the top, and there was a box he found from years ago. And he took it down, and he looked at it, and he thought, man, what's this? That's the ugliest box I've ever seen. And then he remembered. Gary said he took the lid off the box, and there she sat, the Indian girl doll, just as ugly as she was the day he got her. A little more smelly because she had been up in the top of the closet for years. And Gary wept because he realized that that little girl in second grade gave him the perfect example of Jesus Christ that Christmas. Gary said that he spent years searching for her. You know, it was back before the internet. He never did find her. He never got to thank her. But you know, he kept that doll. And to honor her every year at Rose Hill Christian School, until the day Gary Souther died, every year he told us that story. And he told us of how Susie had given him the perfect Christmas gift, that little Indian girl doll. Well, Gary died, and after he died, I promised myself that his story would not die with him, so every year I tell my kids. Gary would always tell that story. We'd all sit and cry. And for a brief moment in school, we wouldn't be too cool to weep. Because every year he gave us the perfect example from a perfect example he was given when he was a child. In Luke 2, we read these words. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, that the days were accomplished, that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. So easy to forget at Christmas, isn't it? So easy as we rush around from one thing to the next, one in-law to the next, one Christmas party to the next, that 2,000 years ago, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one that was there in the beginning, came down and lay in a feeding trough. It wasn't a pretty crib meant for royalty. No, it was just like an old shoebox, wasn't it? Something that no one in their right mind would lay the King of Kings in. Just an old manger, like that shoebox. And Mary, his mother, being just a teenage girl and having no experience with children, she didn't wrap him up in fine cloth and the best silk from China or a purple robe from a king's closet. She wrapped him in rags, just like old newspaper. And that's where he was. The most important man that was ever born. And just like Gary would tell us that story, and he would always read the Christmas account right after, and he would always tell us, don't shove Jesus in a closet. You see, we forget, with all the trees and all the nativity scenes and all the credit card debt we incur, that the most perfect gift was free. The only gift that matters cost us nothing, but it cost God everything. Just as Susie had only one doll, God had only one begotten son, put him in that manger and wrapped him in rags and gave him to us. And so oftentimes we're embarrassed by him. We don't think he's good enough for us. We can't understand why we should be so appreciative, and we take him and we stick him away and forget about him. That's why I tell my kids the little Indian girl doll story every year. I never want them to forget, because I never want to forget. You know, I love Christmas, and I love all the trappings of Christmas and all the touristy things. That's what I call them, the touristy things we do at Christmas. I love it. I love bake-offs and Christmas lights and all that, but I'll never forget that gift that was given. Man, I love that story. And I wish you could have heard Gary Southard tell it. He would always tell us after he told the story of the little Indian girl doll, I'll never forget. He said, now one day, he said, I was a young man and I was almost finished with Bible college, and I wrote this story down and I sent it into a magazine and I made a little bit of money. I've looked for it and tried to find it because I know I don't tell it exactly right. And the kids sometimes will catch me because I forget one detail or the next. I never forget the little red fire engine and the ladder that goes up and down and the bell that goes dingy, dingy, ding. But over the years, they've stopped correcting me because they know it's the meaning of the story that matters and not the detail. It doesn't matter that the wise men weren't there on that first Christmas. It doesn't matter that it wasn't December 25th. It doesn't matter these things that we allow to come in that may or may not have happened exactly the way they did. What matters is that it happened.
Amen.
And that Jesus Christ was born. He was born the perfect gift to a sinful, wretched, selfish bunch of people. Let's pray. Dear God and Heavenly Father, I come to you now.